Ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East is melting down quickly and the world is changing. Throw Russia in the mix and you've got a very, very big problem. All right, folks, let's get into this. I have to tell you that this article doesn't surprise me. I will tell you as I read this article to you that it does tend to alarm a lot of people that are following Bible prophecy, but I'm going to tell you why you should look at this as much of the same, why it should not alarm you, and why this becomes very, very significant either way, especially when you know the Bible, because it speaks to the same things that we've been talking about from the very beginning. Now, I will tell you that there will be some commentary here that's going to involve a little bit of pontificating and presupposition, but I'm willing to bet you that that is based on some education that you may or may not have, but I can tell you it is true, and some of the things that are happening in front of us are nothing short of remarkably historic. This stuff is radical, it's awesome, and quite frankly, it's fun to talk about. So let's get into this. The article here, and this is Breitbart, you can tell where Breitbart's coming from on this bent. It says, Russia, nearing 11th year of occupying Ukraine, demands Israel withdraw from Lebanon. Yes, folks, that is undoubtedly the case, and we'll talk about this. By the way, last week, in case you guys may not know, Israel made the decision to go into Lebanon in order to secure the southern portion of Lebanon. There have been a lot of developments since then. There's been an attack from Iran, and by the time you're watching this, there's probably going to be a few more attacks. We know that the leader of Hezbollah is no more, and there's all kinds of other things that have happened just a little bit before even that time, like Operation Grim Beeper. Anyway, to make a long story short, lots has happened, and Russia is now deciding to chime in for a lot of different reasons. So let's get into this. It says this. It says Russia, which has occupied Crimea for nearly 11 years and invaded the rest of Ukraine 2 years ago, on Tuesday demanded Israel withdraw its troops from Lebanon less than 24 hours after they began their limited ground incursion. Here's the quote. Russia strongly condemns the attack on Lebanon and calls on the Israeli authorities to immediately cease hostilities, withdraw their troops from Lebanese territory, and engage a real search for peaceful ways to resolve the Middle East conflict. By the way, this is the Russian Foreign Ministry office that released this statement. The quote goes on to say this. It is obvious that such a step taken by the Israeli military and political leadership following the assassination of a number of Hezbollah leaders will lead to a further escalation of violence in the Middle East region. The article goes on to say Russia has also condemned Israel for eliminating the Hezbollah leader who ordered the missile attacks, Hassan Nasrallah, with an airstrike on Saturday. Now, I want to make myself very, very clear. Russia has talked like this many, many times before. They condemned the assassination of Hadiyah in Iran. They even condemned the helicopter crash, even though nobody wanted to admit that that was very likely Israel that did that. That, of course, killed the Iranian president and the Iranian foreign minister. Now, remember, when Abdullahian was killed and when the butcher of Tehran was killed, you have to understand that Iran would have never admitted that that was Israel, because in reality, they would not have wanted anybody to know that Israel had a reach that was that strong. Now they're beginning to revisit all of these discussions, because when you stop for a moment to think about the implications, the far-reaching implications of what Israel has done, it is absolutely staggering. Now, I have done a few videos within the last few days that I would highly recommend that you go over when I talk about the intricacies of the pager attack, the intricacies of the intelligence that was used in order to put all of this into effect, and very much the brilliance behind the strategy of what Israel has been doing. It's a pretty amazing thing when you think all of this through. Now, let's get into what this article continues to say. It says the Russian government did not mention the primary reason for Israel's operation in Lebanon, constant missile attacks on Israeli civilians launched by Lebanese Hezbollah ever since the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. By the way, that paragraph is a paragraph that I want you to keep in mind for just a second, because I'm going to go back to the thought that drives that paragraph, okay? So just think about that sentence that I just read, because I'm going to go back to it in just a second. Next paragraph says, one of the justifications offered by Russian President Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine was that NATO missiles were moving too close to Russian territory. Moscow has been enraged by Ukraine launching Western-provided missiles at targets on Russian soil. Putin recently threatened a nuclear response if Ukraine continues those attacks. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, launched what it described as a targeted and limited ground operation in southern Lebanon on Tuesday, targeting infrastructures of the terrorist organization Hezbollah in a number of villages near the border. Lebanese civilians were warned to stay at least 500 meters away from the Hezbollah facilities targeted by the IDF. Israeli officials said there were no plans for a long-term occupation of southern Lebanon, and a march to Beirut like the one in 1982 was not on the table. A military official said on Tuesday that Israeli forces are currently within walking distance of the border. Even as Russia demanded Israel withdrew its forces, Hezbollah was issuing a statement to foreign media claiming that no Israeli troops have entered into Lebanon at all. Okay, folks, I want you to see what is actually happening here, because there's a lot of propagandist lying that is going on. First of all, Hezbollah has been hit really hard. We know that since the fact that Nasrallah is now dead, nobody wants to admit or even begin to think that things are getting worse in Lebanon for Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is slowly splintering. And actually, in many ways, it's quickly splintering, because when you have the people that were running it die, and then the people that would likely take over for the ones that actually did die also die, then the reality of it is you have a splintered leadership infrastructure, and there is a significant amount of, for lack of a better term, desire to want to keep the truth from coming out. Because if you're a member of Hezbollah, you're trying to keep your terrorist organization alive, or you're even remotely seeking to lead it, first of all, you don't want the Israelis to know that you're leading it, because then you become the next target. Second of all, you don't want all of the other people in Lebanon to know that you've lost that footing, because you open up the possibility that the Lebanese will actually work with the Israelis to come against you. And perhaps most significantly, third of all, you don't want people within Hezbollah to think that they are walking into an impossible suicidal situation without the promise or idea that they're going to get anything done. Of course, we know that many of these people were more than willing to get their 70 versions, of course, in order to accomplish a major or more bigger purpose. But in this particular context, they don't think they're going to be doing that. And in many cases, that does not mean that they're doing any kind of martyring as they would define it, which means you're going to have such a morale problem within the ranks of Hezbollah that many of the people who would step up or want to step up or would try to step up won't do it, because they know that the purpose that they are seeking to accomplish is impossible to be able to accomplish. So there's a lot of very sticky issues that are there. And you also have to understand that is perhaps the major reason why Hezbollah is issuing a statement to foreign media that's actually saying that no Israeli troops have entered. Even if Israeli troops have entered, they don't want anybody to know that, especially their counterparts that are sitting off the coast of Cyprus, or anybody that's hanging around in Syria, or anybody hanging around in Turkey, or anybody that might want to step in and to sort of join the cause of Hezbollah in order to regain control, which undoubtedly they're never going to have again. So all of this stuff is really significant, and it's really important. Now we bring in the subject of Russia, and I want to put you in the place that Putin is in right now. First of all, we have to go back to the time that President Biden first became president, or was installed as president. When he became president, one of the very first things that he did, and this is an important thing that you understand, is he went to Russia to have a direct meeting with Putin. Now, let me stop and let me back up just a little bit even more behind that time. And let's go back and rewind even behind the time of President Trump. And let's go back to the time of Obama. If you remember, President Obama created a red line, as he called it, for the Syrians, and with Assad, telling Assad that there was a certain line that he was not to cross. And of course, Assad crossed every single one of those lines. And of course, if you remember, this is how ISIS became what ISIS is, or was, back then before Trump came into the picture. And of course, this is how Syria gained some prominence, because Obama was willing to basically go back on his word, and it weakened the position of the United States in the Middle East. Now, For the 8 years that Obama was president of the United States, the position of the United States in the Middle East weakened so dramatically that the value of the words being spoken of by any leader of the United States really didn't have a lot of weight unless you were talking about specifically a few key areas in the Mediterranean, maybe a few areas in the Red Sea because of the fear of some of the pirates that were messing around over there from Somalia, and of course the Persian Gulf. But even in those situations, the United States was not the moving or shaping authority by which Mideast policy was being created because the United States of America was inconsequential as a result of the poor leadership of Barack Obama, especially when Barack Obama goes to the Middle East and basically refers to himself in essence, in many ways, indirectly as a son of all of these Muslim countries. And then things got even more complicated when Hillary Clinton's State Department chose to create the mess that they created, not only in Benghazi and not only with the assassination of Gaddafi, but also with what happened in Showerat Tahrir. If you don't know what Showerat Tahrir means, that's the street that is in Egypt that created all this problem where the Islamic Brotherhood was actually ushered in. By the way, just so that you know, the Islamic Brotherhood is, of course, the father terrorist organization of Hamas. So Hamas was greatly strengthened during the time of the Obama administration under the Clinton Secretary of State prowess. And you need to also understand that what is really, really important that you gather from here is a lot of personal play that existed between not only the Obamas, but the Clintons. Because if you remember, during the tenure of Bill Clinton, which would have been 2 presidents prior, or 1 president, you had to skip over a president to go back to Clinton. You'd have to skip over Bush to go back to Clinton. The one thing that you will recognize with Clinton tried to make a name of himself through the agreement that was made for the Palestinians under Yasser Arafat, and that was not a good situation. As a matter of fact, that created all kinds of problems. Oslo became a mess. There was a huge set of circumstances that were considered to be a dismal failure, and when Hillary Clinton ran against in the primaries Barack Obama, you have to remember that Barack Obama made a big stink about the instability in the Middle East as a result of the failed presidency, for lack of a better term, that Clinton was going to continue to propagate because of what her husband had done. And so, of course, Hillary Clinton has always been bitter towards Barack Obama for that reason. They never really did like each other. And I would venture to say that Hillary Clinton probably did a bit of sabotaging with Barack Obama, even though neither of them will ever admit that they did that to one another. Now, speaking of people hating each other, now we get to fast forward into the time of Joe Biden becoming president. By the time that Joe Biden became president, the Middle Eastern world was actually shocked because they did not think there was any way somebody like Joe Biden could become president because of the type of foreign policy strength that Trump had exhibited. And the Middle Eastern world actually feared Trump, just like the rest of any part of the world that actually was considered to be an enemy of the United States of America. They certainly feared Trump, and they knew that Trump would do whatever it took to keep the nation secure. So as a result, all of these fake red lines that had been established by Barack Obama or anybody else was no longer valid because Donald Trump actually would pull the trigger if he needed to. And it was through that strength that he kept any wars from happening. You have to understand, under the leadership of President Trump, there were no wars. There were no conflicts. A lot of that stuff was all quelled because of the effectiveness of his leadership and the length of his stick. So if you understand how very firmly he held that stick and was willing to use it, of course, people back down. So we have to go back now to the history piece that I was just beginning to tell you about. That refers to what happened with the United States of America and Putin. When President Biden first became president, he then has a meeting with Putin. In that meeting that he actually called a summit, he basically told Putin, I am going to open up the door for you to finish up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. By the way, that was immediately after he shut down the XL oil pipeline in the United States of America and made it about 50 times harder for any oil producers in the United States of America to work. So he does that here in the United States of America. He runs over to Putin. He basically bows down at the feet of Putin and he says, Putin, I will allow you, we're going to open up the door for you to rebuild or finish building Nord Stream 2, while at the same time creating a bigger dependency on oil from Russia by the Western and Eastern Europeans. The thing that's really interesting here to understand is that most of Europe was already heavily dependent upon Russian oil. If you remember, President Trump warned Germany about this. He warned France. He warned many of these people. He said, don't be dependent upon this oil. They chose to ignore all of that. So by the time the Nord Stream was being built, Germany saw that as a blessing. Many of the European nations saw that as a blessing because they saw that as cheaper oil and the ability to be able to manage more resources. That became a great asset for them. And when it became a great asset for them, of course, it made Joe Biden a little bit more popular amongst the European leaders for just about 5 minutes. Now, in exchange for Putin being able to rebuild or finish building his pipeline, and I'm saying this sarcastically, exchange, there was no contract here. There was not consideration on the part of the United States of America, although it would seem to be. When I say consideration, I'm using a term in contracts, meaning if you establish a contract between somebody, you have to have consideration, meaning someone has to be benefited for what you provide for them, and what they provide for you has to also be a benefit as well, okay? So there's no mutual beneficial relationship here, because what Putin says he's going to do is he says he's going to deal with the Syrian problem, and he's also going to deal not only with the ISIS problem, but he's going to deal with the Yemeni Houthi problem, especially while we know that Biden around that same time declared the Yemeni Houthis to no longer be a terrorist organization. So he basically shut down the ability for us to fight the Yemenis. Or the Houthis, the terrorists. He shut down the ability for Saudi Arabia to fight the Houthis. And that was because, of course, when Saudi Arabia buys weapons from us, they're not allowed to use those weapons against somebody that we have declared to be non-combatants. So Saudi Arabia now has their complete arsenal shut down. And so what Saudi Arabia has to do, they have to go to Russia and they pretty much buy weapons from Russia. Now, what Russia does is Russia says, we'll not only sell you those weapons, we'll allow you to use those weapons any way you want, but don't worry about the Yemeni Houthis. We'll take care of the Yemeni Houthis for you. Sound familiar? It should be. Why? Because Russia has a close relationship with Iran. And of course, Russia having a close relationship with Iran is something that developed during the time under the Obama administration, because that red line got Russia very close to Iran in Syria, and that relationship began to change things in ways you could not possibly imagine. As a matter of fact, while that relationship was beginning to strengthen during the Obama administration, Russia began to put lots of assets within Syria, which in essence made Syria a piece of Russian territory, for lack of a better term. As a matter of fact, later on during the Biden administration, I want you to understand, very early on in the Biden administration, Putin got up and he declared the Syrian border against Israel Russian sovereign territory, and he started referring to it as a Russian border, specifically the area of the Golan Heights, the Syria portion of the Golan Heights. Now, why is that so important? And why is all of this coming together into fruition? Because the United States of America gave complete and total control. All these stories I'm telling you about goes back to this one statement. The United States of America gave complete and total control to Russia over all of the affairs in the Middle East. Russia has become the big dog in the Middle East. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise to us, because when we read Ezekiel 38, we know that Russia is going to lead the conglomerate of nations that comes against Israel, but they're all going to be surprised because they're all friends. They all can't be friends if they don't have a scope of influence that extends into the type of peace that's necessary in order to fulfill the description that we read about in Ezekiel 38. So all of this happens. Russia becomes the almighty, all-powerful group. And then to make things even more complicated, during the beginning of the tenure of the Biden administration, Biden withdraws from Afghanistan. It's a terrible withdrawal. The two countries most prominent that are hanging out in Afghanistan while this is happening is, you guessed it, Russia and China. And China and Russia both took advantage of the utilization of all of those American assets that we left there, all of the hardware that was put there, and all it did was make them stronger. It made the Taliban stronger. It made China stronger. It made all kinds of other people that were sympathetic toward their causes stronger. And that position was something that carried into the confidence that Russia had when it invaded Ukraine as a result of the NATO expansion that was being encouraged by none other than, guess who? You named it, the border czar, okay? You have to understand that, because Kamala Harris created the condition, or accentuated, or let's just say poured fuel on the fire of the condition that is NATO, that forced Russia into Ukraine the way that it was forced to be into Ukraine. And then when we chose to exhibit all of these oil sanctions, then it made Russia even more powerful, because Russia said, okay, you're going to sanction me like crazy. You're going to destroy my pipeline. You're going to do all of these things to try and sanction me. But guess what? Europe is still dependent upon me for all this stuff. And I'm more than happy to sell you oil so long as you pay me with the ruble. So when they go to pay them with the ruble, he gets even more rich, because the value of his fiat currency goes through the roof as the value of European currency drops. And while all of that is happening, the United States of America, under the leadership of Joe Biden and Antony Blinken, resurrects the JCPOA that Trump correctly abandoned. And when he resurrected the JCPOA, the resurrection of the JCPOA created a condition where a loophole was created, where Iran was allowed to build nuclear facilities only for the purpose of enrichment for energy. But the requirement that they put there was that there had to be a nuclear power that would supervise the construction and the maintenance of that facility. And the nuclear power that was named in the JCPOA was Russia, after Russia had an incursion into Ukraine. So the United States of America started paying Russia way more money to be able to help our enemy, Iran, in being able to take care of their nuclear facility. Doesn't it just sound crazy? And now we are in the most dangerous place that you could possibly imagine. Now we are in the place that we are in right now, where all of this stuff is happening, and Russia becomes the voice of authority in telling Israel what to do. By the way, let me add one more thing that I think is really important. When all the crazy things in Benghazi happened, that's when the massive civil war became far more accentuated than it already was. And within the course of that civil war, you have to remember, this is a really, really important detail, Russia inserted themselves in it, and now Russia, in essence, controls it. Very soon, they will win that civil war. They will have complete control over Libya, and they will have a prominent position in the southern portion of the Mediterranean. And by the way, let's not mention the Red Sea, which, of course, Russia has a very prominent position in, specifically from the north to the south along the eastern coast of Africa, which is a very, very important place to be in. And let's talk about their position in the Indian Ocean, the South Chinese Ocean, and of course, without a shadow of a doubt, they are in the Persian Gulf. So Russia is in a position to act when it needs to have authority over all of the things that are going on in the Middle East, and that is changing the world as we know it today. Now, let's go back to the paragraph that I asked you to remember, okay? It's the paragraph that I thought was really, really important. It's the paragraph that I thought was really, really critical, because this is super important for you guys to understand and to recognize. And folks, I have to tell you this right now. When you go back and take into consideration that paragraph, and I'll have our editors put it up so that you'll have it, you need to recognize the game that Russia is playing. You see, throughout the process of them becoming the guardians of the Middle East, they have to have an amicable relationship with Israel. And I can promise you that Israel had discussions with Russia when the attacks on Lebanon took place. I can promise you that every single time Israel attacks the areas near Aleppo or Damascus, they are getting permission from Russia. And I can also guarantee you that when they attacked the Houthi port that is in the southern portion of the Arabian Peninsula, they had discussions with Russia as well, because Russia had to open the door in order for them to happen, especially considering them preserving the reputation of their S-300 and S-400 missile batteries that are designed to take out aerial assets. So with all of that said, Russia going to Israel and going crazy with them, saying, back down, back down, back down, I'm pontificating, I'm betting, I'm guessing, is a simple game of chess. It's a simple statement that they're making to save face for the control that they have in Iran, for the control that they have in Syria, for the control that they have in the southern portion of the Arabian Peninsula. They still need to look strong from all of the people that have contracted from them, like the Saudi Arabians, like some of the people on the coast of East Africa, because you have to remember, when you start getting into the East African coast, you still have Egypt in play, you have Sudan, you have Eritrea, you have Ethiopia, you have Somalia, you have South Sudan. All of these areas that are in that place all have a relationship with Russia in one way or another for very, very specific reasons, and all of it matters. Folks, you have to see it all comes together. Now, with that said, let me tell you what I think we're on the verge of happening. I think that Israel isn't going to pay attention to Russia publicly. But I also believe that Israel is having regular, prominent conversations with Russia, and I believe they're coordinating what they're doing together, and I would not be surprised if Israel has a victorious bout, not only in Iran, but in southern Lebanon and all the other areas that we've been talking about. Russia will have been at the helm of allowing it to happen, and I believe it will be for the strategic benefit of Russia itself. By the way, I want to point one thing out. And this is a great litmus test for you. Stop for a moment and pay attention to what's happening in all of these areas that Israel is getting involved in, where Russia is speaking up or they are interacting with Russia. I'm telling you, when Israel gets involved in those areas, Russia, in one way or another, finds a specific way to benefit from that attack or to benefit from that incursion. And you need to know that Russia is doing the same exact thing here. So when you see this headline, understand this is not the beginning of Ezekiel 38, but what this is, or what may be, is it may be the beginning of a complex and radical coalition that is forming in a way that maintains a semblance of peace that nobody ever thought could possibly happen. Folks, once that happens, then you're looking at the time clock and you're waiting for Ezekiel 38 to happen. Folks, there it is. Now, I know I gave you an earful, but I thought it would be a really, really good idea to just make you aware of everything that's happening from beginning to end. And I want to remind you of one very important thing. God is not done with Israel. God is going to protect Israel. And folks, I want to let you know, Christ could come at any moment. So let's live like it. Let's plan it. Let's anticipate it. Let's literally understand what God has called us to understand. And folks, I can't tell you this enough. Be good students of Bible prophecy. Study it and study it hard, because your expansive knowledge of geopolitics in this region is going to grow in ways you never thought. And you are going to walk more confidently because you know God's word is true and it's going to manifest in spectacular ways. That's what it's all about. With that, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for the nation of Israel, and pray for Jews worldwide. Love you guys. God bless you. Keep fighting the good fight and study Bible prophecy. Love you guys.